Okay, let's open our Bibles to the prophet Jonah. Now, in our study of the minor prophets, we have started in the 9th century. I'm going according to time, okay? The 9th century. From 900 to 800, right in there, or for 899 to the year 800 BC, that was the 9th century. Now we're going to be moving into the 8th century, which is, 800 to 701. Right in there. Yeah, that's it. Or 799. I don't know how they do these dates. But this is the 8th century. Okay? And it's a significant century in many ways for the people of Israel. And I'm going to try to start out the significance of the 8th century BC in Israel. We're going to spend some time on background. Because these prophets, if we just read them as they're presented, as they are, we'll get something from it, but it makes so much more sense. We take a little time and do some real heavy background work to be able to appreciate who this man was and when he ministered to the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, under the significance here, let me just mention that this period is unusually significant, a significant era in the history of the Hebrew people due to the fact that a considerable number of prominent Hebrew kings reigned during this time in Judah in particular. Okay? So, a number of really important kings ruled at this time. Kings like Hezekiah. Well, let me put him up there. Kings like Hezekiah, even before him, going up to the latter end of Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, and I'm just picking out some of the more major ones. Would be Joash, Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah would be some of the major kings, very important kings in the southern kingdom of Judah. Another thing that's interesting is this, that that in Israel, the kings in Israel, 9 of them, so let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of them out of the whole number, how many are there? I think 19, let's see. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, yeah, 19 kings and 20 kings of Judah. 9 of these kings were during the 8th century BC. And one of them in particular, Jeroboam II, was probably one of the greatest of the northern. Not that he loved the Lord, not that he followed in the ways of David, not at all. But he was a great king as far as the things he did, and he reigned for 40 years. That's a long time. But that's out of the 9 of them. That's out of the whole century. Look at this guy. 1 year. It was just a matter of months. Same thing with this one right here, Hezekiah. And these different ones, they just were short because they were assassinated. It was a time of murder. Yeah, Jim.
Do you know how they date Jonah? I've never been able to figure out just when he lived.
No, I know. There is one way he prophesied. He prophesied in the reign of Jeroboam II. So we know he lived part of the time here. And most likely, part of the time, most likely in the first half of the 8th century BC. Because the second half of the 8th century BC was a terrible time for both Israel and Judah. Terrible time. The Assyrians started to rise. And, Some date the book, his ministry or this incident here in 760 BC, some of them in 785, just different dates. No one knows for sure, but in the first half. And I'll show you how in just a moment, okay? I'll show you how they come up with at least that date. So it's very significant as far as Joash and Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and then on the other hand, that the last 9 rulers of the northern kingdom reigned prior to its downfall. This is the end. This is the United Kingdom. Saul, David, and Solomon. Of course, Saul's dynasty was himself, right? There was nothing to Saul because, but David and Solomon were great kings. They brought Israel to the golden age of Israel's history. When Solomon, they reached Abrahamic biblical proportions as far as the kingdom is concerned. God made a significant covenant with David that he would never lack anyone to rule on his throne over this united kingdom. And that's fulfilled in Messiah, Jesus Christ. That's why he's called the Messiah. He's called the Son of David. Every king is measured by David. And, of course, Solomon, who inherited and expanded the kingdom. So under David and Solomon, this was the golden age of Israel's history. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, though. So that's the first point. The second one is this. Israel was, in the second place, unusually successful during the first part of the 8th century BC. Okay? The independence as well as the territory of both kingdoms was still intact at the beginning and during the first half of the 8th century BC. So the point I'm making here is this, that even though the kingdom divided, you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, pretty much the way they divided and the way it was at this point, it was still true in the northern kingdom of Israel. Everything was still intact as they left it here. For example, if you look at the northern kingdom of Israel, centered in the capital city of Samaria, and the southern kingdom of Judah, centered in Jerusalem. 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, and 10 tribes up here. Everything was pretty intact during the time of the first half of the 8th century BC. But it was after 750 BC, after that things began to deteriorate big time for the northern kingdom. In fact, they fell, the whole empire fell to the Assyrians in 722. And the Assyrians came way down and conquered 48 cities, fortified cities of the southern kingdom of Judah. And they came right up to, where's Jerusalem? I'm losing it. Oh, right there. They came down to this major city of Lachish, and then they surrounded the city of Jerusalem. And only in God's great mercy and through a miraculous intervention did God spare the southern kingdom of Judah. You know what that was, you remember? 185,000 Assyrian troops were camped around Jerusalem. 185,000. I mean, this was an impossible situation. And remember, they woke up one morning, went out, and what would happen? God sent the angel of the Lord, and all 185,000 were dead. The only one that was escaped was a guy named Sennacherib, the Assyrian king. And he went with basically his tail between his legs and went back and then his sons murdered him when he got back. But the point is this, God intervened in a miraculous way in one of those events that he spared, even though they had great losses and they were about ready to fall. They did not fall. But the northern kingdom did. It was the Assyrians in the latter half of the 8th century BC that caused such havoc in the world as well as in the West, So But in Israel was unusually successful during the first part of the 8th century BC. The independence as well as the territory of both kingdoms was still intact at the beginning and during the first half of the 8th century. Under Jeroboam and under Uzziah, those two kings in particular, Uzziah in the southern kingdom of Judah reigned for 52 years. It's a long time. Half a century. Jeroboam 40 years. And Jeroboam actually saw the recovery of much of the territory under Solomon's reign. Okay? From the river of Egypt all the way up to the Euphrates. He reconquered much of that. Jeroboam was a popular king and lots of prosperity in the northern kingdom of Judah and lots of prosperity under Uzziah in the southern kingdom. These are good days. These were happy days, you know, the 50s, right? 1950s. These were the happy days after the war, World War II, when things were booming and so forth. The country was just roaring, and it was the happy days for the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But then in 750, the Assyrians started to flex their muscles and to start taking territory and conquering under the great king Tiglath-Pileser III. So, but we're in a good time here. Point number 3, during this period, 3 great crises confronted the Hebrew nation, each of which involved the nation of Syria. Let me see if I can put this down. I know this is... Okay, there's the area. There's Nineveh up here. And basically it began in 745 BC with the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III. He was a great monarch, a great king, but he had his eyes on expanding Assyria, making it an empire in the world. In 745, Assyria was pretty much confined to this area here. The capital was Nineveh. But he came on board and began a time of great expansion. A great time of expansion. And we have the conflict between Ephraim and Syria, which was basically, up here, Damascus, Syria up here, and the northern kingdom of Israel. There was the conflict that took place there between these two groups as they were, the Assyrians were coming over and they were all scared. They tried to put together a coalition, and Israel and Syria joined together in a coalition, but Ahaz wouldn't do it. He wouldn't join it. He kind of made his coalition with Egypt for protection. But anyway, there was that conflict. And the Assyrians took a lot of Damascus, they took a lot of the northern area, but they hadn't touched Samaria yet. Then came the second battle, or the second conflict, the fall of Samaria, where they came down again and laid siege to Samaria for 3 years. 3 years the Assyrians encamped around Samaria, and they just stayed there for 3 years. Basically, what were they doing? They're just starving them out. They're just starving them until they were sad. In fact, it says in the book of Kings that they were eating their children.
No.
The Jews were eating their children. Their water supply was gone. They were just in a place of desperation until they got so low that the Assyrians finally were able to breach the walls and get in and bring the city of Samaria down and under their control, which means the northern kingdom was over with. Mm-hmm. They had devastated everywhere else. It was just the capital city that stood. It was the last refuge for the people. But it eventually fell to the Assyrians. And the northern kingdom of Israel became assimilated into the Assyrian Empire.
So all of that became purple, then all of
Yeah,
that.
so, well, green. Yeah. This is the expansion under Tiglath-Pileser, and then then Sennacherib, and then Sargon. Those are the three Assyrian kings. Okay, this is at the end in 714. This was the Assyrian Empire at that point. So expanded greatly their empire. They were at their strength. Then came the thing I was telling you about, the Sennacherib crisis in this time in 701 is when they came in and they took 48 cities of Judah. Walled cities, fortified cities. And they took them, and then they finally came up to Jerusalem and surrounded it. And let me share with you a reading from here's Sennacherib's campaign. In the 14th year of Hezekiah, the Assyrians finally attacked Judah. The clay prism of Sennacherib, this is all written out, calls Hezekiah overbearing and proud, he writes about him, indicating he was part of Philistia and Egypt's effort to rebel against Assyria. In other words, that's how they looked at Judah. A battle in the plain of Eltekeh was won by Assyria. The Egyptian and Cushite charioteers fled. Lachish was besieged and taken. His annals note, as for Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 48 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earthen ramps, battering rams brought near to the walls, and the attack by foot soldiers using mines, breaches, as well as sapper work. I don't know what sapper work is. I drove out 200,150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, big and small cattle beyond counting, and considered them booty. Himself, that is, Hezekiah, I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence, like a bird in a cage. But here's what's interesting. Nowhere, however, does this boastful Assyrian king record the disaster mentioned in 2 Kings 19 or Isaiah 37. That's what I'm telling you about. 185,000, the number is given specifically. Soldiers were all dead in the morning, and Judah went out and they took all their stuff, all their stuff, and all of a sudden now they're doing well. So that happened, and God miraculously intervened and spared the southern kingdom of Judah, so they were able to go on and survive. Well, where's 701? I don't know, somewhere around here. Anyway, they were able to survive longer. God in his grace and mercy, because they had a number of good kings that walked in the ways of David, like Uzziah, like Hezekiah. Remember what Hezekiah did? He brought the letter from the Assyrian king, and he brought it to the temple before the Lord, and he cried out to God for his deliverance and mercy. These are your people. These are your people. And we're going to be like our northern neighbors if you don't intervene. And God spoke through Isaiah the prophet to Hezekiah and said, Isaiah said, this is what the Lord says. They are not going to win. God is going to intervene on your behalf. And he did. So, in all this very important century, and it was an important century for Israel and Judah, the Assyrians made such a difference in the life of many peoples in the world, and especially of the northern kingdom, which fell completely and became part of the empire, and the damage and destruction they did to the southern kingdom as well. And only God's miraculous intervention sent them fleeing back to Nineveh. So it was a very profound, but it's an important century because its first half was the period in which Jonah, a prophet of Israel, was sent to the chief city of Assyria, that is Nineveh, with his stern message of judgment. And that might be very well why the Assyrians didn't make their move after the first half of the 8th century. Because we know what the Assyrians did under Jonah. What did they do in Nineveh? They repented. They repented from the king right down to the maidservant. They even put sackcloth on the animals. In humility to this God of Israel that Jonah came with the message, 40 more days and Nineveh will be destroyed. This is what the God of Israel says. And for some reason, in God's grace and God's mercy, the whole city, a pagan city, listened to that message and turned and repented. And God relented from his judgment, right? Yeah. But we learn, so what do we get from Jonah here? Well, let's now go to, it's the theme and purpose of this book. Well, people look at the book of Jonah, the theme and its purpose, in different ways. Oh, I didn't do something, I'll get to it in just a moment. What is the point of this book? I mean, there's no prophecy. He's a prophet, but the only prophecy in this book is 7 words, right? Calling Nineveh to 40 more days, and Nineveh will be destroyed. Oh, the 8 words. 5 in the Hebrew text. But the translation is 40 more days, and Nineveh will be destroyed. That's the only prophecy in this book. So it makes you wonder, what is the theme and the purpose? Well, number 1, in your notes, some see it, the purpose of this book is a missionary mandate for Israel. It's a missionary mandate for the people of Israel. Jonah is a picture of Israel. The intended audience is Israel. And the primary application is to motivate them to be God's messengers to the pagan world. Even the Ninevites, even the Assyrians. Others see it as a prophecy. Point 2. A prophetic picture of the future death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And we know that there is some truth to that in Matthew chapter 12. Jesus said this. Matthew 12, it says, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Remember, Jesus said this to the people in his day. "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." So some see the total purpose of the book of Jonah and its message is it's a prophecy or a type of the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. A third one is biographical. They focus on the story of Jonah's resistance. In other words, the whole purpose and message of this book is how a prophet of God can be so resistant to God's direction and will. And that's the purpose of it. In other words, Jonah's unsuccessful resistance to God's call to preach in Nineveh. And there's so many life lessons for us in that. That is the purpose and message of the book of Jonah. Well, I believe that all 3 of those have a part and have some point there, right? I think that the 4th one is what we call theodicy. Say, what do you mean theodicy? It's Theodicy. Justifying the ways of God. The purpose and message of the book of Jonah is to justify the ways of God. God made his case that he has authority over all he has created and has the right to be compassionate toward them, even to evil Nineveh. God has that right. It's a defense of God's sovereignty over and compassion for all nations, even Nineveh. No matter how wicked, no matter how pagan they are, God is sovereign over everything, and he has the right to do whatever he wants whenever he wants to do it. Right? God is God. And if he wants to display his mercy to the Ninevites, he has a right to do it because he's God. And Jonah is a defense. It's a theodicy. It's a justifying the ways of God for all peoples, Jew and Gentiles. That's the point of it. Now, it's also got a missionary message too, right? It's also, yes, Jesus said, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights, that's true. It's also, we can learn a lot of lessons about resistance as believers when God has something, God's word is clear and we just disobey it. This has been a powerful book, as well as the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah's call, when God called him to be a prophet, and he hedged a little bit. Same thing with Jonah. Jonah ran the other way, didn't he? All right, let's go over now to the message of Jonah. The central idea is the abiding message of Jonah is that God is sovereign and is the Savior over all creation and is compassionate toward all his creatures, acknowledging repentance, extending mercy, canceling or delaying judgment as he sees fit. All of his dealings are governed by his sovereign authority and by his compassionate nature. The Hebrew word is hesed. Hesed. It's the idea of God's grace, his mercy to sinners. The key verse is found in the climax of the book, chapter 4, verse 2. You are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. That is the message of this book. God has a right to do with whom what he wishes to do. I have compassion on those I have compassion. I have mercy. I show mercy to those to whom I show mercy. God has that right because he is God. Here's an outline of one of Ken Hanna's outlines. God is sovereign and the Savior, even in Nineveh. You are a gracious and compassionate God, a God who relents from sending calamity. That is the key. The book all leads to that statement. But, now, some date it to 760, others a little bit earlier. Let me take you that one verse in the book. Go to 2 Kings. In 2 Kings, there's only a few places that Jonah is mentioned outside of the book of Jonah. One of them is 2 Kings. Look at 2 Kings chapter 14. Jonah had a ministry as a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel. And it goes much beyond this one time when God sent him to go to the city of Nineveh. Jonah had a whole life and functioned as a prophet, and he did so in the days of King Jeroboam II. So sometime in the first half of the 8th century BC, and we don't know for how long, Jonah ministered as a prophet. It wasn't just this one thing to Nineveh. This was just one time in his life. But he functioned as a prophet. Look at 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 25. Okay, I'm going to read verse 23. In the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel, became king in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Lebo Hamath to the sea of the Arabah, in accordance, now notice, in accordance with the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, spoken through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. So during the kingship of Jeroboam II and his expansion, Jeroboam was encouraged in his military campaigns to regain the property, the territory during the time of Solomon. He was encouraged to do that by the word of the Lord through his servant, the prophet Jonah, son of Amittai. It was Jonah's prophecies that Jeroboam was encouraged to regain the boundaries of Israel. And he successfully did it. So that's the only other occasion. But what we learned from that is Jonah was a regular prophet, right? And it was only one phase of his life when God said, go to Nineveh, that he had a hard time with that. Well, let's look at some of the text here. We'll finish up next week. But the book is divided into two halves, and that is this: Jonah's first commission, go to Nineveh. Okay? And then Jonah's second commission, go to Nineveh. That's right. God had a plan. And he needed a messenger. I want you to go. Well, he kind of took off and went the other direction. Maybe I'll get someone else. No, I want you to go. I sent you. But Jonah didn't want to go. He didn't want to preach to the Ninevites. And they had a terrible reputation for brutality, cruelty. In second, let me just share with you these things about these Assyrian campaigns in the latter half of the 8th century. Okay? The Assyrian invasions of the 8th century BC were the most traumatic political events in the entire history of Israel. The brutal Assyrian style of warfare relied on massive armies, superbly equipped with the world's first great siege machines, manipulated by an efficient corps of engineers. Psychological warfare, however, was Assyria's most effective weapon. It was ruthlessly applied, with corpses impaled on stakes, severed heads stacked in heaps, and captives skinned alive. The shock of bloody military sieges on both Israel and Judah was profound. The prophets did not fail to scream out against their horror, while at the same time pleading with the people to see God's hand in history to recognize spiritual causes in the present punishment. And that would be particularly true of the people of Israel, because what did God say? Remember, it all goes back to what covenant God made with them. Well, yes, but no, the Mosaic covenant.
If you obey my command.
Yeah, it's the conditional covenant and the law of Moses on Mount Sinai with the people. Stayed there for the year, gave him his law, Genesis through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, the law of Moses. And in that law, God had stipulations on how they were to live as his people. And then they confirmed, they ratified the covenant. And they did it, remember what the people said? They did it by blood. And the people said, we will obey everything that the Lord has said. Everything. And then there were all the blessings for obedience, if they would be faithful to that covenant. And then there were the curses for disobedience. And one of the curses is, among the curses is this: you will end up being among the nations of the world the tail, not the head. And you won't have rain. I won't send it. Other nations will invade you and be successful. You will always be, and the prophets were sent by God. They were God's voice. They were God's message. Thus saith the Lord, they said. And their message to the people is, these things are happening because of your disloyalty, because of your idolatry, because of your wandering and your disobedience to our agreement. To our agreement, which you have broken. That's what all this is about. Jim? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess Jonah never, we don't know if he ever reconciled himself to that message. And because the Assyrians, one of their procedures was to transplant whole tribes and peoples from one area to another, so that they would not, in other words, it destabilized them.
Right.
So they brought people from way up north and put them in the
Northern Kingdom of Israel, that land.
That's why the Samaritans of Jesus'
Right.
time were not the northern 10 tribes. They were different people.
And they took the Jews of the land, a good number of them, especially anyone with wealth and royalty and that kind of people. They took them to Assyria, and in the remotest parts of Assyria, they would deposit them, and that's where they lived.
Somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere, just to try to destabilize, to get them to intermarry, and just to corrupt their future. Yes, they did that. That was a cruel thing too, because they would divide families and all kinds. It was horrible.
But politically, it was a very good ploy.
Yeah, politically, and psychologically, with all those piles of heads outside your wall, and they're camped out there coming for you next. You know, just the terror and the fear, they used it. They used whatever they could. And they were brutal, cruel people. And Jonah wanted nothing to do with the message. 40 more days and Nineveh will be destroyed. Of course, implied in that message is, you have 40 days to do what? And Jonah didn't want to preach it. Because he knew, what does he say? I knew you were a gracious and compassionate God. Slow to anger, abounding in mercy. I didn't want to come here. Because I knew this might happen. It could, because this is what God's like. So he didn't go. Well, let's look at chapter 1, and we got 5 minutes. Let's look at chapter 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. And after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, we know that he was from Gath-Hepher, up here in the northern kingdom. Gath-Hepher is up in the area of Zebulun, up here in this region, up in this area, up in here. So he went from here and he went to the port, what we call Haifa today, or Jaffa, right, Haifa. And there he got a ship, and he found that ship that was going to Tarshish, which is on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, right at the Rock of Gibraltar, either North Africa or southern Spain, where that all comes together. That is where scholars say Tarshish was. So he was going to the farthest place he could possibly go, away from Nineveh. Nineveh is this way. And he was going that way on a ship, because he did not want to go with the possibility that maybe this gracious and compassionate God might, if they respond, relent. Just might. I'm not willing to take that chance. Verse 4, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. They threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down, and he fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." This terrified them. And they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord, because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried to the Lord, "O Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, O Lord, have done as you please." Then they took Jonah, threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. It's an interesting chapter here, isn't it? The man in his times, let me just give you some fill-ins here. The man in his times. Jonah's one of those, I'll say, a little bit strange books of the Bible in some ways, because he was a prophet, yet he was a missionary, but he saw great revival. Yet who was this man? When did he live? Was he for real? He was the son of Amittai, but the book gives no other information about him. He's mentioned briefly in 3 other books of the Bible. So this guy is different. He was a prophet of God, but he would not go to Nineveh. But he was sent there as a missionary. When he finally went, he saw great revival. And he was afraid of that. I mean, why would God be sending me to Nineveh? What was possibly God have a concern for these people there? What is he sending me for with a message? Maybe in the back of his mind he thought about that. Well, Jonah's call, point B, okay. Several things. How did the word of the Lord come to him? God spoke to Jonah by a vision or dream. I'm not going to get into all this, how God speaks to us today. The answer is through his word. We don't have visions and dreams. God's call was specific. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it. Point 1, Nineveh was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to end here because we need to. Let me put this. This is the great city. This is the great city of Nineveh as it was at that time. It was in that time. By the way, this is still a public park today. If you go to Mosul, Mosul, you've heard of that city, right? Especially, Mosul. My son Paul spent 9 months in Mosul with the army, and that's where they were stationed. And Paul says, right in the middle of town, in the city of Mosul, there's a statue of Jonah. And the men in his group said, "Who's that?" Because Paul was talking about it. They had never heard of Jonah. So Paul told them this Bible story of Jonah. And there's a statue of Jonah right there in the middle of Mosul. A statue. But anyway, this is a city, and it's still been excavated. Mosul today is much bigger than that, much bigger. This is is in the inside of the Sea of Mosul today. There's a town, a city of about 600,000, very large for that time, and this is where Jonah is saying. Okay, we need to end. It's past time. And we'll finish this up. We'll deal with the 4 chapters next week. Let's pray. Our Father, we're thankful for these prophets. We've spent time trying to get a picture of their time